All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on a hidden pattern in the markets, one that's played out like clockwork for over 50 years. It's called the war extension sequence. It's this predictable rhythm that's tied directly to geopolitical deadlines. And guess what? A huge one is just days away. So let's break down exactly how this thing works.
So to start, let's talk about someone you've probably never heard of, an urgent care nurse from Arizona named Elena Marquez. The source material says this about her. She knows something about what happens in the 48 hours before a ceasefire deadline that almost nobody watching CNBC understands. So what's her secret? What does she know that they don't? Well, she knows the sequence.
And really, her story gets to the heart of what we're talking about today. It poses this massive question. In a world that feels completely chaotic with all this market volatility, is there actually a predictable pattern you can see and follow? And based on 53 years of data, the answer seems to be a resounding yes.
In that pattern, it actually has a name, the war extension sequence. Now, this isn't just random chance. It's a framework that is unfolded in 5 very distinct steps, every single time a major geopolitical deadline has collapsed.
So what is it exactly? Well, think of the war extension sequence as this recurring 5-step dance that you see in gold and oil prices. It shows up consistently right before and right after a big geopolitical deadline, like a ceasefire or an embargo falls apart. And this isn't just some vague theory. The source describes it as a predictable, almost mechanical process. It just happens.
And this slide, this is the roadmap for the whole thing. It all kicks off with step 1, the deadline approach, as all the tension is building, then boom. Step 2, the deadline breach, that's when the talks fail. That leads to a really critical step 3, the dollar reaction, and step 4, the real yield peak. But all of this, it's all building to the grand finale, step 5, the gold and silver advance. Let's dig into what each of these really means.
Now, step 3, the dollar reaction. This is a huge fork in the road. In what you'd call a classic supply shock, like back in 1973 with the oil embargo, everyone gets scared and piles into the US dollar for safety. That makes the dollar surge. But in a credibility shock, something totally different happens. The markets start to doubt the stability of the whole system. Faith in the dollar as that go-to safe place starts to wobble, and it actually gets weaker. Understanding which path we're on is absolutely key to knowing what's coming next.
Okay, so that's the theory. Sounds interesting, right? But has it actually worked in the real world? Let's jump into the historical proof and see this sequence in action.
This pattern isn't some new discovery. It's been playing out for decades. We're going to look at 3 perfect examples where the sequence unfolded just as predicted. The OPEC oil embargo in '73, the start of the first Gulf War in 1990, and more recently the Russia-Ukraine conflict in 2022. These are going to be our case studies.
And just look at the results. After the deadline was breached in each of these conflicts, gold went on a tear. In 1973, it shot up 40% in just 2 months. In 1990, it was up 11% in 8 weeks, and in 2022, we saw a 15% jump in only 45 days. The numbers are pretty hard to argue with.
So here's the most crucial takeaway. Looking at 53 years of data, covering every major war-related deadline, the pattern held every single time. At a certain point, it stops being a coincidence and starts to look a lot more like a machine.
Okay, so that brings us to right now, today. And the best part is, instead of getting bogged down in all the confusing headlines, the pattern tells us there are just 2 specific numbers you really need to watch.
The real key here is to just tune out all the noise, all the speculation, all the so-called experts arguing on TV. Forget the headlines. The sequence tells us to just watch the data.
Here's the first number you need to know, the DXY. That's the US dollar index. Just think of it as a report card for the dollar's strength against other big currencies. The magic number to watch for is 97. History shows that when the DXY spikes during a crisis and then falls back below that 97 level, it's like flipping a switch. It signals the start of that really powerful Step 5 advance. And the second number is the 10-year Treasury yield dropping below 3.5%. This is the confirmation. When you see both of those things happen, the DXY under 97 and the 10-year yield under 3.5%, the historical data shows that Step 5 is officially in full swing.
So, when that step 5 does kick in, how have people typically positioned themselves for it? Well, there are a few common tools. You've got ETFs like GLD, which gives you direct exposure to the price of gold. There's SLV for silver, which tends to move with gold but can be a bit more of a wild ride. That's what higher beta means. Then you've got GDX, which is an ETF of gold mining companies, and that can give you a sort of leverage bet on gold prices. And finally, for people who are worried about keeping all their assets in one place, there are options like AU, which holds physical gold outside the US system.
So we've looked at the history, we've broken down the mechanics, and all of that brings us to the most important question of all. What happens next?
Let's just take stock of where we are right now. First, we have that Iran ceasefire deadline coming up on April 28th. Check. Second, the dollar already peaked up around 106, and it's pulling back. That perfectly matches the credibility shock pattern we talked about. Check. And real yields, which is just the return on a bond minus inflation, they've also peaked and are heading down. Every single piece of the puzzle is clicking into place. It looks like step 4 is just about done, which means step 5 could be right around the corner.
Now get this. Here is a critical signal that almost nobody is talking about. Something called the convenience yield on U.S. debt just turned negative. Okay, what on earth does that mean? Well, normally, investors are willing to get a slightly lower payout on U.S. bonds just for the convenience and perceived safety of holding them. When that yield goes negative, it means that safety premium is gone. Poof! They're no longer willing to pay for that safety. And according to the source material, this exact thing happening has been the final warning shot right before every major gold rally since 1971. And listen, this isn't just some fringe idea. You've got heavy hitters like Ray Dalio, the founder of Bridgewater, who recently wrote that he's, quote, seen this movie before. He's talking about this exact setup: a weakening dollar, a war deadline, and a Federal Reserve that's painted into a corner.
So, there you have it. The sequence is all laid out. The history is crystal clear. We've pinpointed the key numbers to watch, and a major deadline is staring us right in the face. You now know about a pattern that very, very few people are watching. So the only question left is, what are you going to do with that information?